Hello, gorgeous entrepreneur. It's Tash Corbin here, and welcome to another episode of the Heart Centered Business Podcast. This is a special Spotlight Series interview with the one and only Claire Riley. In this episode, Claire and I talk about the joy of consistent and strategic content in your business. And you're going to want to grab the link to the show notes today, which is tashcorbin.com/241, because over with the show notes of today's episode, I've also got a link to one of Claire's amazing free resources, and you'll be able to go and lovingly stalk her and find out more about what she does, as well as see a little summary of what we talk about on today's interview. This is a really juicy one, and I know for myself that getting my content working consistently and strategically has been the difference between the long-term compound interest effect of growth in my business compared to that stop-start feeling like you need to start everything from scratch. Claire is an amazing entrepreneur. She is also an integral part of my team because she is so great at getting the best out of you and your content. So without further ado, let me hand over to Past Tash and the amazing Claire Riley for this epic Spotlight Series interview. I'm Tash Corbin, and this is the Heart Centered Business Podcast. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Spotlight Series. I'm joined today by the fabulous Claire Riley. Now, Claire has had her hands in my business several times in my business journey, and I always get magnetized back to her because she is the most organized person that I know, and she knows how to organize a system and make working in a structured way very joyful. Now, Claire is also the leader of an amazing program called Batch It Crazy, and you may remember from a previous episode, Claire actually asked a question about her membership. So Claire gets two bites at the cherry in my podcast over the last couple of months. Welcome to the podcast, Claire.
Thanks so much for having me. It's so awesome to be here and have a chat.
Yeah, very exciting. Now, do you want to tell everyone a little bit about your business and how you help women entrepreneurs in particular?
Absolutely. So I'm just coming up for my 5th anniversary actually in my business, and it's had a few different iterations, but it sort of boils down, the best way I can describe it these days is by being a professional Virgo and a bit of a business geek. And it just means that I get to play with business stuff and do the strategy and the structure and all the content-y marketing bits and pieces as well. And that just combines beautifully with the fact that I'm a little bit over the top with creating beautiful systems and things that work and make things easy. So
I love it so much. And today we're going to talk about content in particular because it is such an important part of our business. And it's also an area of consternation, let's say, for many people because particularly if we feel creative, we can resist having that structure to our content. I know myself, I knew that batching my content was going to be on my agenda eventually in my business, but I resisted it for so long because I wanted to go with the flow and, be attuned to what was going on in my audience. I had lots of excuses for not batching, and you are the batching queen, so we can talk about that. But I wanted to ask you to kind of start us off. What do you see as people's biggest resistance or pain points when it comes to creating awesome, consistent content?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. I guess the first one is, like you said, there's a lot of people who are waiting to be hit because they know that they go through these cycles of getting the inspiration and the creative bursts and that sort of thing. So they're waiting for that to happen. Yeah. And often when that happens, which we'll talk about later, when that happens, if there's no structure or intention or plan to kind of pick up, it often ends up being a bit misguided or it doesn't happen anyway and it sort of falls a bit short. So that's one of the things. I guess one of the other ones is not knowing where to start. So many people are so good at what they do and they have so much that they could teach and talk about, and it's overwhelming to try and find where to start and what to do first. And there's, so many people say, I'm starting a blog. What's going to be the very first? It needs to be monumental and foundational and world changing. You're like, no, it doesn't. It's fine. It's going to go to the bottom of the pile faster. So it doesn't need to be anything special. Just do whatever. So where to start and what to actually do. Or they get to the point where right, I'm going to sit down and create some content. And then they've got that white screen of death and the blinking cursor of doom or whatever you call it. And that feels really overwhelming, and that everything just sort of goes out of your head as well because there's no sort of starting point. And often that's, from a lack of, having the intentional, purposeful reason to do the content, not just because some chick over here said you have to do content.
Yeah. Absolutely. And there's so much we can dive into on that. One of the things I want to cover off first, though, is what is the downside of not having the content come out consistently and doing its job and all of those sorts of things? Because I know for myself, I've had 3 periods where I haven't had podcast episodes go out for a couple of months, and then I lose subscribers and I lose my momentum and all of those sorts of things. So let's have a little chat about that. Like, what are the costs of not sorting out the consistent content thing?
Yeah, sure. I guess the most obvious one is that you fall off people's radar really quickly. If they're not seeing you in a consistent way, showing up, even if that is a monthly newsletter or a once every couple of months blog and some regular social media, that sort of thing, there's so much other noise and there's so many other influences that we can latch onto, and we can go and get our information and we can get our inspiration from. And so you kind of just go to the back of people's minds, and that sort of thing. And I think there's a bit of a risk, especially when you're in the earlier stages of business and you're not quite established, of doing the stop-start, because it sort of creates a bit of a mistrust when you're like, here's all my content, and then you disappear for a period of time and then you come back again. People are like, oh yeah, I remember her. Where did she go? And then you're back for a bit and then you disappear again. And people are a bit like, is she here to stay this time? Do I still hang out? Or is this just a bit of a, that sort of inconsistency? So it doesn't help with the know, like, and trust building factor. It also, I feel like, and you probably felt this when the podcasting kind of died off, is that you lose that momentum and you kind of lose the motivation and the inspiration to try new things and to test your messaging and to just talk about stuff. And then when you feel like you have to come back into it, you're back at that sort of square one thinking, oh, this has to be amazing and monumental and whatever to restart it. And that feels overwhelming. So it just perpetuates the time that you're not doing it.
Yeah. That pressure that we put on our content. I say this to people all the time about their first webinar, their first blog, their first podcast episode, their first video on YouTube. We feel like that first one or that first one back after a break needs to cover off so much. And I actually also often say to people when they forget to do a newsletter for a while or it falls off, don't start your first newsletter back with a big apology, because most people haven't noticed necessarily that you've disappeared. But I remember, I think it was about my 3rd year in business, there was someone that I was following and I got 3 emails from her throughout the year and all of them apologized. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Blah, 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 this has happened. And it instantly told me you are completely unreliable here. And if I jump into a paid program of yours, are you going to disappear from that as well? If I jump in and work with you as a VIP, am I going to have to chase you all over the internet to try and get you to reply to my emails? It doesn't create a sense of trust. One of the things that they say is that the number one driver of trust is I can predict your behavior. And so if you're not consistent with your content and you're constantly apologizing or you're constantly coming back from a break, I'm going to have trouble predicting your behavior. Therefore, it's going to be hard to trust you, whether that's conscious or subconscious.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing. Yeah.
And so we know with content that if we have the flip side, it's consistent, it does its job, it's strategic, and you play with things and you're experimenting and refining as you go, that's going to have a huge impact on our business on the positive side. It's all the flip sides of those negatives. So what would you say is like the key reason why people resist having the structure around the content that would allow them to have that consistency?
Yeah, really good question. I think part of it is the wanting to have the creativity and the flow and being able to be responsive or reactive to what's going on and that sort of thing, which I completely get. And I have this conversation all the time where and I often start with a question like, why aren't you blogging as often as you want to? Or why aren't you on social media or all that sort of thing? Yeah. And the answer is, oh, no, it's too restrictive. I want to be creative. And my answer is it working for you? And invariably they say no. If they say yes, I'm like, kudos to you. You've got your system. If that's what works for you, go nuts. But if that's what you think works for you and it's actually not working for you, then you got to change something, right?
Let's try something else.
So exactly, try something else. And I think the other thing is that a lot of the time when we talk about content planning or anything like that, where, especially even people like me, because I'm a bit of a perpetual planner, shock horror, that I like to plan things 6 months in advance. And I'd rather spend 2 full days getting everything locked in and then not have to think about it for the next 6 months. and be able to walk away and, schedule it or hand it over and that sort of thing. But I totally understand that feels really heavy and too far away to even think about. So, and a lot of people who do work in the content field were like, let's do a yearly content plan, or let's do even a monthly content plan, can feel really heavy and feel like, well, I don't know what I'm going to be doing in 6 weeks time or 8 weeks time. I haven't quite worked that out yet. So it feels too structured sort of things. So we sort of then flick it over and just let's talk about what's the message that you want to be getting over, so that at least you've got a filter to put everything through, so that you're not getting to your computer on a Monday morning going, right, I'm going to do my Facebook post for the week. You're like, what was I talking about? I have no idea what there's even structure. And then you go and make a piece of toast instead, right? Nothing's still done. There's no sort of planning, but it's really great if you can have some sort of basket to make it easier for you to focus on what you're actually talking about, what you're promoting, what you're teaching, or all of those sorts of things.
I love that so much. And one of the things that I have noticed, particularly with people who are still trying to get into a rhythm with their content, is that because they don't have the structure or they don't have a consistent process, content is a daily burden. It's a worry, right? It's like, because you're trying to stay flexible and just do it in the moment, every single day you've got that, have I done content? When was my last newsletter? And even for me now, I think I've had a consistent newsletter for almost a year now. And I still every few days go, did I send last week's newsletter? Because I'm in that habit of not trusting the system, because I've had so many different ways of trying to do it, and it's been so it's been such a worry, and I have to get out of the habit of worrying about these things. I'm like, no, it's all taken care of, Tash. It's totally fine. I'll go and just double check my spreadsheet. Yep, definitely went out. It's okay. And that is definitely something where I have found that actually having the structure and a process I can trust creates that flexibility and creativity, because I don't have to worry about the day-to-day pieces of content. I can then be really present with my audience in other ways, like Facebook Lives, or checking in on what people are commenting on my Facebook posts instead of having to write the Facebook post. Being able to play with things like Instagram stories and Facebook stories recently. If I wasn't getting my baseline content taken care of, then I wouldn't have felt that unbridled creativity and let's play with something, because I would have needed to tick some boxes that I hadn't ticked off yet.
The bare minimum stuff, for sure. And I think even if you just talk about just the Facebook posts that you just mentioned and being able to go and engage, part of the purpose of having content on your Facebook page, whether it's 3 times a week or 3 times a day or wherever you're at, the reason for doing that is to engage with your audience and to be able to start and follow through with a conversation. And if you're so stressed every day about what am I going to post and coming up with something and feeling quite drained by the end of even just doing a post on a daily basis, the last thing you want to do is go in there and have another conversation and keep it going. And then there's people who are maybe commenting or doing whatever you want them to do, but you're too knackered to even go and follow up with them. Like, what's the point then? There's no point. One of the beautiful things about even having a little bit of content scheduled onto your Facebook pages, as I said, I spend a couple of days every 6 months, hand it over, and then all gets scheduled. And I get notifications on Facebook saying, so-and-so's commented on your post. And I'm like, oh, I wonder what I posted today. It's really interesting for me as well. And the comments, because sometimes you see the snippet of the preview of what people have commented, and I'm like, oh, I wonder what question they're answering or something. And then I get to go in and actually have fun engaging and having the conversation and asking more questions if I don't understand what they're on about or whatever. And that's a much nicer way to spend the time. It's much more strategic and structured, but it's also much more fun and pleasing.
It's joyful.
By doing content every day.
It brings back the social in your social media when you're free to actually talk to people. And we know that connection equals conversion. That's where people really build their relationship with you. Not in the post that you slaved over for 30 minutes today just to get something out and then freaked yourself out and had to eat some cookies afterwards just to calm yourself down. And then never seeing that post again. It's in the conversation that happens as a result of that content. And, I think for a lot of people, staying away from the structure and that consistency and even batching, like avoiding batching, is costing them the joy of social media and content and actually engaging with their audience. And that feels like such a shame to me, because I find Facebook an absolute joy and pleasure in my business. It's one of my favorite parts of my business. But I must admit, it wasn't one of my favorite parts when I had that like worry every day. Oh, what have I got to do on Facebook today? Oh, I'm missing something. I've forgotten something. So yeah, that's really interesting. I want to dig into your brain about batching though, because I know this is really where you are amazing, and your ability to craft a system that's actually designed specifically for an individual is just like phenomenal, right? Because I know you have your like special systems that you recommend for people, but one of the reasons why I keep inviting you back into my business is like, yeah, I like that system, but here's a little like tweak about me that makes my business a little bit different, and you are able to create something like absolutely brilliant. So I want to know, like, what's your advice when it comes to batching in particular?
Yeah. Look, I think, like you said, it's never a one size fits all. So there are always solutions. Every time I do a quarterly content planning party, it's different, because I want it to, if it didn't work for you last 3 months, let's try something different this time. All of that sort of thing, and making it more bespoke, and feeling okay with it being even a bit of a Frankenstein. Like, I heard this from that person, that works for me, but the other half doesn't, and putting a few bits together and having a play with it, I suppose. So there's some key elements, I suppose, that do make it a bit easier to not only create and plan and batch and publish, but also to just have the planning kind of thing going, right? To have it all kind of come together. So those, I would say, is having some sort of plan. And this doesn't need to be like the next 52 blogs that I'm going to write with bullet points of the takeaways or anything like that, or, anything super micro. You could say, if you're really clear on what I'm going to be selling next. So when I'm in launch of Batch It Crazy, you bet all I'm talking about is content related and systems for content at that time. So just having that as a bit of an idea, even if that feels like a loose enough plan for you to kind of stick to, it's that sort of basket effect, right? So having some sort of plan. And I also like having some sort of structure with what sort of content your audience is going to enjoy and is going to consume, and finding the sweet spot with how you like to create content. So, there's no point in beating yourself up about not doing Facebook Lives if you're not there yet. Like, let's find there's 5 million other types of content that you can create that your audience will like, that doesn't feel like it's going to, do you in emotionally. So I think having some sort of a plan with that sort of thing, having some systems to know what to do with your content once you've created it is a really big part, and a definitely a missing piece. There's almost everyone that I speak to has a heap of written, either partly written or completely finished blogs sitting in their a desktop somewhere on their G drive. Not doing anything because they're not sure how to get it onto their blog, or they've done it once before, but it was so long ago and WordPress was being a bitch and we're not totally sure how it works, and I can't remember which buttons to press, and I can't find the image in Canva and all of that sort of thing. So
can I add, actually, there's another layer to that as well, that I know that there are tons of people out there who have got the blog onto their website or the video onto their website, but then they've never told anyone about it. So it doesn't actually do its job of going out there and spreading the word and bringing traffic back to the website. Yeah. So there's different layers to that, getting it out there that people can forget. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, there's some businesses that are very heavy on search. And if that's one of your businesses, then maybe you can get away with putting it on your website and then leaving it there to gather cobwebs. But most of us, especially I think in your audience, we're very heavy on the social, so the search or social business, and we're very heavy on social. So we want to get to know you and then be like, hey, come over to my place and read my blog. So there's no point in sticking it on your blog, and if people aren't looking for that sort of thing. So exactly that, and that does happen a lot. And even sometimes people put it on their website and then share it to social media once, then it gets left to gather virtual cobwebs. Like it's such a big missed opportunity. And for most of us, you don't even have to go and create loads of new content all the time, because we have so much content. And one of the first modules in Batch It Crazy is to go on a treasure hunt, or a stock take, I think I've called it, or something like that, and go and find all the places that you already have content, your website, emails you've sent, comments you've replied to, posts you've replied to on Facebook, private messages. actual blogs, social media. Like we all have, if you have a business and you've ever told anyone anything about your business, you already have content.
Yeah.
You don't need to keep recreating it all the time. It might need a tweak, but just having that sort of system to share it makes a really big difference. So so back to that, having something that's like a workflow or a, you know, whatever you like to call it, that says when you do a blog, you save it here and you post it here and you blah, blah, blah. And it gives you a bit of a checklist so that when it comes to having created whatever the content is, you're not having to use any extra brain power to try and remember, like, what did I do last time? And what am I supposed to do now? And making sure I'm not going to miss anything, because that just feels really bloody hard. And it's just going to sit on your to-do list and not actually get done.
Yeah.
Whereas if you've got something that, and you know, some workflows are 5 steps: write the blog, add to the website, schedule 6 times to social media, send it in my newsletter. Can be as simple as that, just as a bit of a checklist. Or then there's the Claire Riley version that's got the 24,000 steps and all the links and all the screenshots and all that sort of thing. No surprises there. Yeah. I don't show many people that because I know that it's overwhelming and it's been a work in progress over 5 years, but it's also been how I do life for the last 35 years. So, you know, it's kind of a thing, but that's cool. Yeah. But having some sort of system that makes it easy, if not joyful, to get it done. And if it doesn't bring you joy, get someone else to do it. Like you can literally hand over things like this. There's I often talk about this. A few years ago, I did a big batch of content and handed it over to a VA. And in my head, I'd budgeted for her to spend 20 hours doing it. And she came back after 7.5 hours. She'd done 360 posts or something like that over the next 6 months, and it cost me less than $50.
Oh my gosh.
Like, what was I thinking? Why? Of course it's okay for me to sit down and spend a day of my time to get 20 hours at least back of my time, because I'd faff around and fart ass around. She's the professional. This is what she does. Of course she's going to be faster than me. And to then not have to think about my social media content for 6 months for $50. And I tell people that and they do exactly that face that you just did, like, what? Hang on a minute, I could, what?
Yeah.
And when you know things like that and you've got some of those support mechanisms in place, it just makes it so much more of a no-brainer. And you know that you get to do the fun content creation stuff and hand the tech stuff over to someone else who finds it fun to do that stuff, you know?
Yeah. Actually, it makes me feel like there are like different phases to content and people lump it all into content. Yeah. And so we feel like we have to do all or nothing. And that's where people get stuck because they think, well, no one can record the video for me. So I have to do everything associated with that video. Yeah. So you've got your content strategy and planning, which in most cases works best when you have an external perspective or someone to help brainstorm it with you and all of those sorts of things. Then you've got the content creation piece, and content creation isn't typing out every single word, right? So for my business, content creation is me recording this on video, sticking it into a Dropbox. The rest is taken care of. And that's the only piece that I do. When it comes to creating social media posts, there are certain social media posts where I do write the content for all of them. And then there are other social media posts where I don't write the content. I just get someone on my team to review some of my old blog posts or podcast episodes and pull out some tips out of them and go and put them on my Facebook page. And we have a little checking process where I go and read through them, make sure that it's right. But that doesn't mean I need to do the work involved in that piece. So you've got your content strategy and planning, then you've got your actual content creation, then you've got your content organization. And I think this is where people let themselves down. They create the content, they distribute the content, they don't actually store or organize that content in any reusable, repurposable way. So there's that piece. And then there's the distribution and redistribution. And when I work with people on outsourcing, I say the first thing to outsource is your content distribution. The end of the process. You have no business sitting on Facebook Creator Studio, copying and pasting things and scheduling them up and picking the dates, not your job. So do whatever you need to do to get that piece of the process done by someone else. And what that will do, it will highlight the holes in your storage and organization process. Because if you're not storing and organizing that content, how can someone go and find it and schedule it for you? And if the storage and organization part is working, then it will, and you've got someone doing that, it will highlight the gaps in your creation process. So you can kind of work your way back instead of just viewing content as like this one all-consuming thing.
So true. Yep. And so much of that is an admin function. It's not the creative genius that you are in your business. And there are a lot of people who do this sort of thing, like what you do with the video recording of your podcast, and then you turn that into the audio and the written version, but someone else does that because this is what lights you up that you're great at. Then everyone else can do the other stuff. It doesn't have to be you sitting there and exactly like you said, pressing the buttons. And when we do things like that with anything to do with outsourcing, we, the first couple of times I outsourced, I'm like, this will probably take me like half an hour. So I'll give her an hour because she won't be as fast as me. And then she'd come back in 15 minutes, be like, that's done. I'm like, oh, she must have done something wrong. And then I did this a couple of times before I got the reality check of like, hang on a minute, she's the professional at this. Of course she's going to be faster. Yeah. And when we do it, we'll go and, go to publish something on our website and be like, oh, while I'm here, I was also going to do blah, blah, blah. And then you go and you get lost down all these rabbit warrens, and a 5-minute job takes 3 hours and you still haven't done the 5-minute job because you've been distracted in 15 different places as well. And so content is, I'm exactly the same. It's one of those things that it's kind of not stuff upable. It's one of those things, even if it does get stuffed up, it's not going to break your business, and it's pretty easy to fix. So it's a really good place to start getting confident with outsourcing as well.
100%, 100%. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about is it's one of the benefits of having the content sorted and consistent, but I think it's also something where we can be much more strategic when we have a system around our content, and that is getting our content to do its job.
Yeah.
So, if we think about posts on social media, they have certain jobs: reach, warming people up, getting them onto your mailing list, maybe presenting an offer. Your blogs, what is its job? It needs to be searchable. It needs its keywords, all of those sorts of things. So I think for me, the biggest shift that's come with your help with batching and organizing my content is that I can now start making those tiny little adjustments that allows that content to do its job more effectively.
Yeah.
So I'd love to know, like, it's a little chicken and egg for me sometimes when I'm working with people, because just get something out consistently and then we'll make it strategic. And then I'm like, well, let's just have one conversation about your strategy, and then you get something out consistently. Yes. So how do you approach the getting your content to do its job piece?
Yeah, it's such a good one as well. We often talk in Batch It Crazy when you're first starting either a business or starting to create content specifically for your business. A really great way that I think makes it feel a bit safer is to just throw some spaghetti at the wall and see what happens.
Yeah.
So to give yourself permission to experiment and to get it wrong, and to, you don't have to do an 1,800 word blog. It can be 500 with 20 bullet points and be super basic, as long as your audience finds it helpful and valuable and, all of those sorts of things. But to really test your messaging, and it's not even necessarily messaging heavy, it's your story and what you want people to think, know, feel, do, and understand. Mm-hmm. So sometimes, we do a categorical kind of content plan where we talk about, these 3 main things that happen in your business, or 3 main messages, or 3 main things that you want people to understand in your business. And we just cycle through them and see what sort of things get the engagement that you want, and ask the questions, and if it's at the right level, and all of those sorts of things. So it's kind of just a bit of playtime. And I think that's really valuable, and we don't need to skip straight into the heavy strategy, because we're playing with building a profile and getting known and creating systems and all of those sorts of things. So I think it's okay to start there, but there's always this point where that does start to feel a bit pointless because there's no hard strategy behind it. So then we sort of flick into what I always refer to more like a campaign centric or campaign specific content. So it just kind of pulls it back, and usually those categories become products. So each category might have almost like a funnel. So there'll be the blogs that you do and the social media stuff in that category, which leads people into a freebie, usually, which leads them into an intro level and then into a VIP level or something like that.
Yeah.
Even just focusing on that sort of thing. So saying for the next 8 weeks, I'm going to be focusing on this certain promo or a freebie or a launch or something like that, and getting really specific with creating content that leads people. Like the next obvious thing is to join the webinar, or the next obvious thing after I've read this blog is to download this PDF, or the next obvious thing, whatever. So it becomes that sort of, you kind of reverse engineer it. So if the VIP looks like this, they have to do this intro first, but before they get to the intro, they're going to need to come to this freebie. And before they get to this freebie, these are the things they need to know, think, feel, do, and understand.
Yeah.
That's the job of your blogs. So you do get a bit more specific from reverse engineering it that way.
Yes. Yeah.
And, you watch people and you can tell what they're about to be launching based on what blogs, podcasts and social media things they're doing, right?
Yeah.
That's a really nice thing. You're like, oh, okay, watch out for the promo on that one, or sign up for the webinar, or do whatever.
Yeah.
That becomes, and it actually makes it easier to create then, because you've got a really tight little basket that you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I like that it takes away that perfectionism of needing to have all the pieces together before you can do the first one. And I do see that that's where a lot of people get stuck with consistency of content, is they're so focused on making sure that every piece of content is hyper strategic, linked to a product, has a call to action, has the right keywords, is strategically SEO'd, is posted at exactly the right time for their audience. There's so many factors that they need to get right that they never actually take the action.
Sure. Yeah.
And I really do love that whole, like, just chuck some spaghetti at the wall for now. At least you'll have something out there. We'll have some kind of measure. And you've at least developed your skill level and your habits of being in content creation mode.
Yeah. And even just practicing your voice, I think, is really important in that level. You know, a lot of us into businesses from corporate, and we accidentally stay in corporate speak when we start creating content. And then we realize, gosh, my best friend would always say, oh, you're doing your work voice again, or something like that. And I read some things from 5 years ago. I'm like, God, it sounds like my work voice when I was writing back then. Yeah. But it's a really important thing to play with. And I don't think if you know, going from zero to super strategic, there's been no playtime. Like, have a bit of, yeah.
And I think also, even for me now, I have a portion of my content is that super strategic plan stuff, and it's keywords and all those sorts of things. But I still have a portion of my content that's play and just for funsies. And a lot of that playful, in the moment content, because I've got the freedom to do it, is what helps give me insight into what people find interesting. Or it gets, I've shared, you know, a funny meme in the moment, and it's got 400 comments on it. I shared a post recently about, do you keep your chocolate in the fridge or the cupboard? Because it is such a bone of contention in my family, because we grew up in Queensland and it gets all melty in the cupboard. Right. But even when we live in cold climates, we still keep it in the fridge. So I had been talking to my sister about it. I was like, I'm going to put this on my Facebook page because that's funny. Yeah. And it had like 400 comments. Yeah. And people were like really hardcore committed to their side of the fence. That's really good for algorithm stuff and playfulness. And actually people were sharing where they lived in the world and why they made that decision.
Oh, interesting.
And so it actually created conversation and connection with a lot of my audience, because a lot of these people, I didn't realize they lived in Queensland, or I didn't realize they lived in a hot area, or I didn't realize they lived somewhere really cold. And so it really did deepen our connection, even though it was such a frivolous topic. Yeah. And so I think that that's where we come back full circle to what we started talking about, which is the joy of your content. Your content isn't just like this robotic stuff that you push out and it's then, you know, push out content, pull in dollars. That's not why we started our businesses. We want to be here for our audience and connect with real people and serve people and help them. And so it brings back that joyful part of our content creation and distribution process as well, which is really awesome.
True. Yeah, so true. And it's the human element, you know, of like what's behind the scenes. Like it's nothing to do with your business, but how good is it that now we know that you've got a personality and a sense of humor, and we can have a chat about chocolate, and it doesn't have to be all heavy business strategy all the time. And and it can be a bit frustrating because you're like, I just posted this epic, amazing, genius tip and no one commented. And now I'm asking about your favorite type of nacho chip. And there's 4,000 people who are very strongly opinionated on this. It can be a bit frustrating, but also how good's the conversation? And it's the fun, the social in social media, like you said before. It's what it's there for. It doesn't have to feel like a heavy thing on your to-do list just because someone told you it's going to be done.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. So someone's been listening to this podcast episode. They're totally excited. Okay, I'm going to be more prepared with my content. I'm going to do some batching. What would you say, Claire, is their first couple of steps?
So I think most people do really well with accountability, whether that's a biz buddy or a bestie or a coach or mentor, someone like that, but just someone to check in with and say, this is one of my goals for this month or this quarter or something like that. and writing it down. So I often track my actions rather than the outcomes, just for shits and giggles, really, because it's kind of a bit more fun. And I know that if I take these actions and they become habits, then I'll get the outcome. It's just what happens, right? So I often will set a target for a month or for a quarter to say I want to get 10 emails out, 10 newsletters, and I want to write 2 new blogs, and I want to go on Facebook Live 5 times or something like that. And I actually track that as a habit, and I'll share that with my community, whether it's my biz bestie or in an accountability group or something like that. So having some way to probably set some really realistic goals and actions rather than just thinking I've got to get more consistent with my newsletter. The second thing is to put it into your calendar and plan the time when you're going to do it. When I first started batching, especially with blogs, I booked out with my then husband. Every month I'm going to spend a Saturday morning at my favorite cafe. I'm going to drink way too much coffee. I'm going to have my headphones in, and I'm just going to sit there and write a heap of blogs. Yep, no worries, that's cool. So once a month, 4 hours at the cafe, drinking coffee, eating eggs Benedict, writing blogs. And that was like, I felt like a freaking rock star. It was just the best thing out, right? After my coffee and my laptop at some funky cafe. But having that booked into my calendar meant I actually did it. And that's, true for most people. So if it's important, you've got to set some time aside for it. Whether that's a day a month or 2 days a year or 2 days a quarter or an hour a week or whatever that looks like, whatever feels like it's doable, that's, pop it into your calendar so that it's there. And the third thing is...
Can I also say start small? Because I go on retreats every 2 months now for a week or 5 days. And I do a big batch of recording and all of those sorts of things. But I remember when I first decided I was going to do batching, that was my idea of what batching needed to look like. And I didn't do it for the first 2 years because I couldn't get that time away, or I didn't have the cash flow for it, or, things got in the way or appointments came up. And so what I just decided to do was see if I can do 4 at once. And I was like, okay, I'm going to see if I can do 6 in a day. And then I'm going to see if I can have 2 days of content creation and planning, and then, growing it from there. So start small when you're doing
it. Could even be an hour on a Friday afternoon to schedule in some posts for next week on your Facebook page.
Yes.
Or something like that,
So good.
With a glass of wine in hand, of course. Make it fun. And I think, to go on even further than that, if you're starting to wanting to get more consistent and put out more content, going from I've never posted consistently on my Facebook page to I'm going to go for 3 a day every day for the next 6 months is unrealistic. You'll do it for the first 2 weeks and then you'll burn out and you'll hate it and you'll never come back for another 6 months, and we'll be having this same conversation again in 6 months' time, right? So it's about starting small and going from 0 to 3 posts a week. And once that feels like it's easy and it's happening smoothly and you're getting the good engagement, then let's go for 1 a day. And then give that a couple of months to, get into the process. And then once that's happening, add another couple on the weekend or something like that. So it doesn't have to go from 0 to hero, because it's never sustainable to do that. Better off to pick some smaller, chunk down goals and that sort of thing. And once they're rolling, then ramp it up.
I think that would also allow for outsourcing as you go, and outsourcing instead of going, I did the same thing with hiring a VA, right? I'm not going to hire a VA until I can afford them for 20 hours a week. Now, at the time, most VA hiring you had to do through agencies because, 2013 was a long time ago now. But, and Upwork wasn't as good as it was, and Fiverr was terrible, and, all of those sorts of things. But nowadays you can hire someone for 2 hours a month or 5 hours a month, and just start with that small thing. So get something working consistently and then outsource it as best you can. And then when that's outsourced, then you can work on something else or ramping it up and doing other things. And so you're just handing over little bits as you go. So much more sustainable, so much more likely to be successful, and a lot less pressure on your cash flow as well.
And it builds your confidence in the whole process as well, rather than feeling like, we have this conversation quite often about, do I have to have all of my systems ready before I hire a VA? It's like cleaning before the cleaner gets here, right? The whole idea is that you're hiring someone whose zone of genius is the stuff that you haven't already got your shit sorted with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would also say there's different levels of outsourcing support that you can get. So something that really helped me was hiring a systems person like you, and having someone who helps me do that organization so that it makes sense to a VA, because all the tasks were in my brain and I just went, well, this is what I do. And then I'm trying to explain it. And then I don't realize, oh, I've got to remind them to do this. And, oh, you've got to set the featured image and you've got to do this for the SEO. And so all those bits that I just naturally and easily did, I didn't have anything captured. And so it made it really difficult for someone to take it over from me. So that's been an absolute like game changer for me as well, is having those checklists for people to follow, or those processes or procedures, means that when I do hand it over, even if the procedure is not perfect, which we've discovered even with some of my most recent ones, at least then when it doesn't work, we know what the flaw is and we can fix it. If I just consistently say, oh, well, I don't have the perfect procedure, so therefore I can't outsource it, I'm just keeping myself trapped in those low return activities, and I'm staying in that burden worry space of content instead of getting into the joy of content.
Yeah.
Oh, Claire, this has been so good. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. One of the things that I always end my interviews with is asking you, if I was to quote you on the joy of content, what would you like me to say?
Probably the same I say about most business systems is it doesn't have to be this hard. Choose the easy way.
Choose the easy way. I love that so much. What a note to end on. Thank you so much, Claire, for being on the Heart Centre Business podcast. If you are listening along and you would like to find out more about Claire, we'll make sure that we have a link to all of her stuff over with the show notes of today's episode. And until next time, from Claire Riley and I, we cannot wait to see you shine. Bye for now.
Bye.
Would you like more tips, tools and resources to help you grow your heart-centered business? Head to tashcorbin.com today.